This is a story of two peoples, a river that divides them, and a war that's decided not by swords, but by a bond that's way, way deeper. We're going to dive into a chronicle of conflict, betrayal, and a last-ditch defense so wild, so unthinkable, it changed absolutely everything. So let's start here. 10,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's an army of 10,000 hired fighters, all assembled for one single devastating purpose. They're marching on one city. And get this, their goal isn't just victory, it's annihilation, total destruction. They want to literally wipe their enemy off the map. For the people inside that city, this is the end of the world. No question.
So how on earth did it get to this point? To really understand the sheer desperation on those city walls, we have to rewind. We've got to go back to the beginning, back to an oath that started this whole mess.
Okay, so let's set the stage. At the heart of this story are two peoples, the Chittims and the Tubal. And what's so fascinating is how their whole destiny was basically carved out by the land they lived on.
And this right here is absolutely crucial. On the left, you've got the Chittim. They're out on these wide open, fertile plains, building their cities right by the river. Easy living, but also, pretty exposed. Now look at the Tubal on the right. They've got a massive strategic advantage. Their city, Sabinah, has the river on one side and a wall of impassable mountains on the other, a natural fortress.
And, well, you know how it goes when you share a border. It wasn't long before tensions just exploded into all-out war. And the Chittim, being masters of those open plains, they move fast. They hit hard. The result? A brutal, crushing defeat for Tubal. 370 of their men were cut down in a single campaign. They were completely shaken, forced to retreat behind their mountain border and figure out what to do next. And here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. Instead of just rearming for round two, the people of Tubal did something different. They chose a completely different kind of weapon. They swore a sacred, binding oath. Just think about the power in those words. This isn't about territory anymore. This is about identity. They drew a line in the sand that no army could ever cross, a total separation of their bloodlines. They were basically saying, you will not touch us. You will not corrupt who we are. And to really understand the weight of this vow, you have to know this one detail. The daughters of Tubal were legendary. We're talking famous across the known world for their beauty. Kings, princes, nobles, they would travel from all over just hoping to marry one. So with this oath, Tubal was locking away its most famous, most sought-after treasure. And for a little while, it actually worked. A sort of uneasy peace settled in. But it was a peace built on a promise. And we all know promises are made to be broken, right? 3 years. That's how long the oath held. 3 years of this tense, quiet separation. But then, in the year 2043, everything was about to come crashing down. So here's how it all went down. A group of about 20 young men from Chittim, they decided to push their luck. They went over to Tubal looking for wives, and of course they got shut down. The oath was holding firm. But they didn't just go home. Oh no. They waited. They waited for the harvest season, a time when everyone would be out in the fields, distracted. And then they made their move. They stormed the city and abducted the young women. Well, the people of Tubal were absolutely enraged. They immediately rallied their forces for revenge. But there was just one problem. Remember those impassable mountains that had always protected them? Yeah, now they were a trap. The Chittim were gone, and the mountains made a counterattack impossible. Tubal was defeated by geography itself. And that brings us right back to where we started. The very next year, Tubal, still burning with that unresolved anger, comes back. But this time, they're not alone. This time, they've brought that massive army of 10,000 hired fighters. Now, there are no mountains to save the Chittim. They are completely, totally overwhelmed. They're pushed all the way back into their city, and as Tubal's unstoppable force prepares for that final city-breaking assault, the people of Chittim are trapped. It looks like it's all over. But right then, as the army of Tubal masses at the gates, the defenders of Chittim play their one last desperate card. And believe me, it is something nobody could have possibly seen coming. It wasn't a secret weapon. It wasn't a hidden army they revealed up there on the city walls. It was something else entirely. The ultimate weapon in this long, bitter conflict,
it wasn't forged in fire. It was born from the very act of violence that started this whole war again. From the top of the walls, they brought them out, the children, the sons and daughters born from the women of Tubal who had been taken. And their cry echoed across that battlefield, a question sharper and more painful than any sword could ever be.
The effect? It was immediate. It was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. That one question, that one sight, brought an entire war to a dead stop.
The army of Tubal just froze, staring up at the walls, faced with the undeniable truth that those were their children, their own flesh and blood. How could they attack? They couldn't. The commanders turned their forces around, and the Great War just dissolved. So what happens after something like that? Well, in the years that followed, the Chittim looked for a new future. They expanded, but not towards Tubal. Instead, they turned towards the sea, building 2 brand new coastal cities. It was a clear sign they were moving on, putting distance between themselves and that contested river and the shadow of that broken oath.
And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question. The war was over, sure, but the wounds were still there. The oath was shattered, bloodlines were merged by force, and a whole new generation was born from an act of violence. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Can a peace born from such a desperate, violent act ever really last?